All set? Okay, well, good morning and happy Women's History Month, and welcome to the March 15th meeting of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. This is our third board meeting of 2023. And today, the CFB will be voting on enforcement actions for two transition and inauguration entities, also known as ties, from the 2021 election cycle, public payments for the upcoming 2023 election cycle, and to ratify a denial of a candidate's Rule 7-09 petition. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February 15th, 2023 meeting. I move the approval of those minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Next item on our agenda, I'll ask our Executive Director, Beth Rothman, for her report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to our board members, our staff, and everyone watching at home and folks here. I'd like to start by saying Happy Women's History Month, like our chair. We do have a lot to get through today, and my report's a bit longer, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I just wanted to, it's a bit longer because we have quite a few updates. First, I want to say that I want to acknowledge that some candidates did experience technical difficulties last week uploading their voter guide profiles, and we have been working very hard with our internal tech experts and our vendors to identify what caused this issue and to rectify it so it will not happen again. We apologize for the inconvenience, and again, as I said, are working very hard to ensure that this does not happen again. 2023 will be the second time that our city utilizes ranked choice voting in our primary elections. And New York City Votes has hosted a ranked choice voting event and will be again having a training tonight at 6 o'clock. If you can't make it, then we will be hosting a training every month leading up to the June primaries. We also have some other election training and updates. CFB staff will be hosting training sessions for campaign staff and candidates next week. On March 22nd, there'll be a 2023 and 25 compliance training. Then on the 23rd, there'll be a 2023 and 25 CSMART training. And on the 28th, a post-election training. And then to close out the month, we'll have a new to the CFB training on the 30th of March. Okay, training registrations always close just before midnight the day before the trainings. And of course, if you have any questions, want to reach out to us, always call us, or you can of course email us at trainings@nyccfb.info, or just come to our website and we'll repeat all that information for you. We're here for you. So we have 130 candidates registered for 2023. And already 7 ready for 2025. Today we'll be giving more money out for candidates for the 2023 elections. These payments wouldn't be possible without our phenomenal team that works really hard every day to make sure that we are only giving out public money to candidates who qualify. And we have already given out over $1 million today. And we have another 15 candidates who are going to be really ready to get additional funds today. So lastly, I just want to reflect that this work that we do here is contributing to making our city stronger and better. We had a strong role that we played in making our city council stronger and better and more reflective of the important role that women play in the city of New York with a majority women's New York City Council. So that is definitely a strong part of Women's History Month. And so I'll lift that up since we're here issuing payments today to some strong men and women running for office in 2023. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. The next item on our agenda is the announcement of campaigns and compliance. The following candidates have completed the post-election audit process without any violations and penalties assessed by the Campaign Finance Board. The board recognizes the diligence of the candidates and their campaign staff in running campaigns that maintained compliance with New York City's campaign finance law. Of these campaigns, 3 are first-time candidates with the CFB. These candidates are all from the 2021 election cycle. First, Constantine Jean-Pierre, City Council District number 40, a first-time candidate. Timothy Rosen, City Council District number 24, a first-time candidate. Mark Shushkiewicz, City Council District 47, a first-time candidate. And John Tobacco, a candidate for controller. Next on our agenda are consideration of penalties with respect to 2 ties, and we have appearances scheduled for both of them. Are they both here now? Okay, so we'll take it in the order that it's listed on our agenda. So the first matter concerns the tie of Mayor Eric Adams. So with his representatives and the CFB staff involved in this matter, please take a seat at the table.
We're also joined by Robert Bishop, virtually the surveys.
Okay, well, welcome to you. I see you there, Mr. Bishop, and would you 2 gentlemen introduce yourself?
Of course, Arden Gugani, Associate with
Joshua Beck, Flores Compliance Specialist at LLP.
Okay, Bethany, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Bethany Persky, CFB General Counsel.
So I'll just briefly go over the way in which we're going to proceed. The CFB's General Counsel will just briefly tee up what the issue is. It's not exactly an argument, it's just an outline of why we're here. The floor will then be yours to make any arguments and presentations that you wish to make. Bethany may respond. We may have a few questions. We'll go back and forth until we've exhausted the issues before us. We'll then hear from the next candidate as well, and then after that, the board will go into deliberations. We'll come back and we'll report on our decision. Okay, Bethany, why don't you tee it up for us?
Thank you. Before the board is the matter of the Eric Adams transition and inauguration entity of the 2021 elections for mayor. CFB staff is recommending that the board find the following violations and assess penalties according to the penalty guidelines: accepting prohibited donations, failing to properly wind down tie activities, and failing to respond in late response to requests for information or documentation. The tie contests the CFB staff recommendations.
Okay, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Schaefer, Executive Director Robin, Bethany, other members of the board. Thanks for your time and the opportunity for us to meet with you today. I'm Bob Bishop. I'm a partner at Pitt LLP, and unfortunately, I'm in Albany today and unable to be in front of you in person. It's our privilege to represent the Eric Adams 2021 transition and inauguration entity. I'm accompanied, as you saw before earlier, by 2 of my colleagues from Pitt LLP, Arden Gugani, who's an associate attorney, and compliance specialist Joshua Becker. They really have developed a lot of expertise on the issue, and I'm going to turn over the rest of the presentation to Arden.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. So, starting with the prohibited donations, over the 3 months of operation from mid-November to the end of January, the tie received 919 donations totaling 1.9 million, just over that. Accounting for the refunds, the tie received 1.078 million in donations. At issue in this section are 5 donations totaling 15,600, just under 0.8% of the aggregate donations. All 5 were ultimately refunded by the tie. In light of the substantial compliance, the tie believes that the CFB staff's recommended penalty is excessive. On the 5 donations identified by the CFB, 4 of them were made by Act Blue, which made it impossible for the tie to review the donations until after they were already deposited in the bank account, as stated in our response to the penalty notice. The tie reiterates its argument that the purpose of the doing business donation restriction, when enacted, was to prevent the perception of those doing business with the city as having a higher access to elected officials than other donors. At the time the tie received and refunded each donation, the tie held funds far in excess of the amount received or refunded, such that these funds were not necessary for the tie's operation and were effectively never used. In its final recommendation to the board, the staff dismissed the argument, arguing that the use of the prohibited funds is not the primary concern associated with doing business donations. Instead, it's that the tie is prohibited from receiving donations from those doing business because of the heightened risk of corruption or the appearance of corruption once a candidate becomes an elected official. This reasoning, however, fails to account for the fact that none of the incident donations were received after the candidate was inaugurated. Further, it fails to account for the fact that the Campaign Finance Act expressly allows for those having doing business dealings with the city to, in fact, make contributions to candidate committees of incumbent elected officials running for re-election or election to other covered offices. When the first donation was made, it was for $250. It made up only 0.2% of the bank balance of the tie, and less than 1.1% of the total donations. Excuse me, it's 0.1. From this date to the date of the last identified donation, the tie's daily balance summary decreased only a single time, a reduction of less than 1% of the bank balance. On January 19th, the day before the first refund identified, the bank balance was 1.3 million. Following the refund, the bank balance was 1.17. The sum of all identified donations is 15,600, or just under 28%. As stated in its response to the penalty notice, the tie never received had it never received these donations, operations is not impacted at all. They accounted for a negligible portion of the overall funds. While prevention of actual or perceived corruption is an admirable goal that the tie supports, these identified transactions don't rise to that level. Regarding transaction ID 79500, in responding to the staff's third recommendation, which we will discuss later, the tie identified a refund check issued to the donor on January 20th, 2022, and redeposited to the bank account on January 25th, 2022. This redeposit was one of a number of checks that were made and then redeposited to the bank due to an error in the list of required funds. In this case, the check in question was made out for $100 more than the donor actually donated. This was redeposited into the bank, and a refund for the correct amount was made on June 1st, 2022, following the notification by CFP staff on May 19th. The tie argues that a more appropriate penalty for this transaction would be $250 rather than the 50% rate. The initial refund was made timely, however, due to a clerical error, it was made for an incorrect amount and had to be reissued. Regarding Ms. Selfridge specifically, the tie has no information at this time regarding her inclusion in the doing business database between the dates in question, August 2021 and April 2022. Currently, the tie is unable to see any proof of this status, and none has been provided. When the tie staff reviewed the transaction at the time, Ms. Selfridge did not appear on the database. The tie should not be penalized for information that it cannot verify or information for which it's not aware. CFP staff only noted its recommendation to the board that per review by CFP staff, Selfridge was listed on the database between these dates. However, publicly accessible database does not provide the range of dates for which an individual was listed. The database only returns the information for when the individual was added and listing began. If CFP staff has access to information that the tie does not, or cannot access publicly, that information should be provided to the tie. As stated in our penalty notice response, for the applicable time frame and donations were received and refunds issued, the tie's bookkeeping activities, requests for refund checks, they were all the responsibility of a single individual who served as custodian of records and primary contact with the bank. Excuse me. During the same time, this staffer was also employed full-time at Borough Hall, maintained records for the 2021 committee, and facilitated proper filing of disclosure statements for the 21 committee this time, and then continued on assisting with the 2025 committee. All needed, and also needed to contend with transition activities being rescheduled due to the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 pandemic. which led to the inauguration event being canceled and postponed to overlap with another event. As part of the staffers' governmental duties, they worked on the physical move of the office from Borough Hall to City Hall and were partly responsible for then Borough President and Mayor-elect, later the Mayor's schedule. In addition to all of this, the individual also had an extraordinary personal burden. This was in the form of a legal separation from a domestic partner. This occurred at the end of 2021. The surrounding impact events, stresses of that obviously were building in 2021 and continued on past that point in 2022. The tie has with it a signed statement from the staffer to this effect. We could provide at your request. During the period between December 17th and January 20th, the refund date of many of the transactions identified, there were a number of holidays during which the bank account was closed, including Christmas, New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Day. A combination of these factors led to few opportunities for the tie to issue refunds. Process for obtaining refunds from the bank account required the tie to send a requested refund payees and amounts to the bank, and the refunds were processed by the bank oftentimes over the course of several days, depending on the total volume. January 20th was the first opportunity for the tie staffer to issue the refunds since the previous refund date, which was December 13th, before the December 17th notice from the CFP. Specifically, the funds identified by transaction IDs 78405, 78623, and 78775 all occurred 21 business days after the notice from the board, not including the federal holidays and closures. Despite these many responsibilities and the burdens, the staffer made tremendous efforts to ensure compliance with the Act and board rules. Throughout the existence, the CAI accepted over 900 donations. Staff only currently identifies 5 at issue, which is 0.5% of the total volume. Given the overwhelming rate of compliance, the TIE argues that the amount recommended in the penalty is entirely excessive and overly punitive. Accordingly, we request that the CFP exercise its discretion to depart from the standard penalty guidelines and instead calculate the amount of penalty based on the amount of the donation. The penalty should be calculated based on the fixed 250 penalty per violation, which would be 1,250 at most. The board has complete discretion to set a penalty on this issue. Regarding the failure to properly wind down tie activities.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because I think it may be easier if we sort of take one issue at a time rather than try to keep all of the questions or issues we may have in our mind. So I'm going to stop you just for a minute and ask Ms. Persky if she'd like to respond on this first issue relating to accepting prohibited donations.
Sure. So first, regarding the argument that the individual donations are not problematic due to the overall volume of donations received by the tie and the bank balance. Not only is that not supported in the law or the penalty guidelines, but from a policy perspective, to adopt that view would have the perverse impact of benefiting candidates who are more connected, who have more access to wealthy donors. There's absolutely no support in the law or in the theory behind the law for reducing penalties for any individual donation based on the proportion of the total donations that it constitutes. And to do so would really be anathema to contribution limits into the program at large. Regarding the fact that the elected candidate had not yet been inaugurated, he had been elected. So I would argue that's really a semantic distinction. CFP staff does have access to historical data for the Doing Business database that is not available to the public. That is exactly why we do not penalize for timely refunded Doing Business donations. In this instance, there were many donations that were initially cited that the tie refunded within 20 days that are not cited here, that are not recommended for a violation or penalty at all. And because the notification from staff constitutes a substitute for the information that would be publicly available, the tie would then have 20 days, not business days, but 20 calendar days from notification to refund those donations without any violation or penalty being recommended.
So yeah.
I'm a little confused by that.
Sure.
Does that mean that if during the relevant time that contribution was accepted, would they have had access to a database which showed that she was doing business with the city?
At the time of the donation, yes, that name would have been listed on the Doing Business database. However, if you look now, if the person has been removed, even if they were on the database at the time of the donation. I believe that the publicly available information does not show the historical dates when they were listed on the database, but we do have that information. So we know that at the time of the donation, it was publicly available information that she was listed.
Just following up on that one more time, because we're, I guess, referring to the donation from Donna Selfridge. Are you saying that they would, that it was publicly available and therefore they were on notice that she was on the database, or that they became, or they got notice when they received the notice from the CFB? Which is it?
It's both. It would have been publicly available information at that time. However, at the campaign, and as noted, some of the Act Blue donations, maybe they didn't have an opportunity to look prior to receiving them. Even if they did not check that publicly available information at the time, they would have been on notice when we notified them.
And when did you notify them?
Let's see.
While you're looking, which were the Act Blue donations?
The transaction ID?
Which one?
Sorry. ID 78405.
Just give us the names. if you can,
Arnett?
because I don't
Yeah,
have.
no worries. Arnett, Selfridge, Moynihan, Monopoli.
It was all of them except Sparkle.
Exactly.
Sorry, this might take me a little bit of time.
Well, if it'll help, your memo to the board indicates that an individual that, with respect to Selfridge, that she is an individual listed on the DBDB on November 27th.
That's the date of the contribution.
Oh, I see.
The date of the notification would have been sometime after that. Sorry, December 17th was the notification date.
December 7th, let's see, okay, so it was a couple of weeks later. All right, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Do you have some further thoughts about this issue?
Yeah, just briefly regarding the staff member who was responsible for ensuring compliance, noting that the penalty guidelines are set with the presumption that all compliance is unintentional and that ties are making their best efforts to comply. The penalties are also set as a proportion of the dollar amount to the total donation, so they are by definition proportional to the amount. The ties do have an obligation to employ any necessary staff that they need for compliance. As noted by the tie itself, they certainly had ample funds at their disposal if they wanted to retain additional staff to ensure that they were in compliance.
As a user of Act Blue, and never for city elections, but as a also frequent user of Act Blue, when does the campaign actually get information about the contribution? In other words, so when would you have known that Selfridge had made the contribution? How long after the Act Blue, she entered into the Act Blue system?
So speaking speculatively, not being the person who did the direct review at the moment, it would have been possible for somebody, if they were constantly logged into Act Blue and at 24 hours out of the day looking at the results and refreshing, they could have seen it immediately. But the campaign would not have received any official notice of it until the daily update that's sent by Act Blue to whoever is subscribed and has an email account connected to the account in question. And then to actually look into what the name of the person was would require the campaign to select, or tie to select into that login and look. There were people who were doing data entry who did not have direct access to Act Blue for security reasons, obviously, the ability to directly refund from there being one of them. The campaign, though, would have received the deposit of that fund nearly instantaneously the business day per Act Blue's policies.
And the information about the donor.
The donor information would be manually exported from Act Blue and put into CSmart. So hypothetically, it could have been done manually immediately, but if it was done as a batch import, let's say weekly or monthly, it would have been done at that time of the import, when somebody would download the Excel file from Act Blue and reformat it for the CSmart import and then upload it. There was a mix of And from the information we have, there was a mix of batch imports via Excel and manual entry of data in this time. So this specific instance, I don't know offhand how this transaction was entered.
Okay, I'm going to suggest you move on to the second issue, failing to properly wind down tie activities. Before I do, I'd just like to note, since there are no questions about it, just to assure you that we are aware of your argument about this money that during the time that before it was refunded, it wasn't in any way used because it was such a small percentage of the contributions. We take note of that argument, and we may or may not consider it in our deliberations, but you need not to go into it despite the fact that we didn't ask any questions about it. Why don't you move on to the second issue?
I appreciate that. Just on one thing that was said, I wanted to just note that when it comes to staffing, there were many volunteers who were involved in this process, a great deal. Like I said, some of them were doing data entry, didn't have access to every piece for security reasons. Don't want them to have full access to ActBlue. And in the same token, we restricted the access to the bank account and gave it to a particular person who was trusted, experienced, and knew the people at the bank to be able to directly go. So it was a matter of finding the most suited person for this role, not solely the fact that there wasn't some volunteer that could have done it. But as for the proper wind down of tie activities, regarding cessation of operations, the tie is still now waiting for the resolution of two issues. One, the New York State Insurance Fund, and two, Guard Insurance Corporation. Each entity contacted the tie in connection to claimed outstanding balances. NYSIF specifically contacted the tie on October 26th and the 27th to state that the claim in question was mistakenly not assigned an auditor. So no work had actually been done by NYSIF until just shy of a month after our response to the penalty notice. When it comes to Guard Insurance, we are still trying to respond to them and get in touch with them, but we have not received any return contact from their representatives. The auditor for NYSIF has also been out of the office, and per their voicemail is returning to the office today. Each of these outstanding balances are based on the entities each calculating an expected balance based on pay for a period where the tie did not pay any employees. So we are challenging both of these. We do not believe there's any existing balance, but there are pending claims by each of the two entities. That's, if there's anything more to tell.
Yeah, so some of these details I'm hearing for the first time, but as I understand it, the insurance issues came up for the first time in May and June 2022, which was still after the April 30th, 2022 deadline to terminate all activity, which was itself an extended deadline in the case of expenditures to allow for inaugural events taking place later in the year to the outdoors due to COVID. Point being that under the rules, they were already on notice to terminate by April 30th before any of these issues even came up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The our rule is confused. It's maybe a more generic question. What happens if they do close and they terminate and then these issues arise? How are they supposed to deal with it?
I mean, they would contact us and we would help them figure it out, I guess is the answer to that. I mean, there's issues with campaigns as well that come up sometimes after they've closed their bank accounts. And it's just an administrative issue that needs to be figured out. But the central point is that under the rules, ties need to be wrapped up and terminated, within due time after the inauguration has happened, because there really is a limited amount of time during which transition and inauguration expenses can truly be transition and inauguration expenses at a certain point in your office.
I have a related question. So as you point out, the insurance issue arose after the deadline, but as of that point, they were still awaiting receipt of two overpayment refunds. So would you agree, and therefore are arguing that they needed to keep the bank account open for that purpose? Could you address that argument?
Yeah, I mean, again, administratively, if we had been contacted, we could have provided some sort of assistance with that. In this instance, all that happened is that we sent a warning and then we had to administratively terminate because it was at that point 2 months past the deadline.
Anything further on this issue that you'd like to say?
No, I think the only thing that comes to mind is that this was obviously a very compressed timeline in operation and then termination. Like was said, many other entities and campaigns do deal with things that come up after the date of the election. But in this instance, versus those, we had a hard set, this has to be the end. Whereas a campaign that might be in the post-election audit phase does have the opportunity, as that goes on, for however long it takes to address these concerns, absent the compressed timeline.
Was there any reason for not contacting CFP about some of these outstanding issues?
In some, I'd have to look back to see what the timeline of when particular issues were raised. Immediately, no, I don't have a particular reason why. But I do think some of them had been discussed. Obviously, when it comes to the overpayment refunds, that was something that was sent by CFP staff to us. But no. Okay, unless there are any questions, the next one. So on failing to respond to requests for information and documentation, through the lifespan of the tie, staff worked diligently to address the matters raised by CFP staff in a prompt and timely manner. As referenced earlier, much of this work was done by an individual who, in spite of extraordinary labor burdens, both professional and private, was able to ensure significant compliance with the law and rules. The tie operated on a citywide level at scale comparable to many citywide campaigns, all within a very compressed timeline of less than 3 months from mid-November to the end of January, during which donations were received. For responses to statement reviews, the tie was afforded only 1 to 3 weeks to respond to each. For example, the June 22nd notice provided only 8 days for a response. By way of comparison, for scale and scope of this tie versus others, during the 2021 tie cycle, net donations to the tie were more than those to all other ties combined in the 2021 cycle. The tie with the next highest number of donations was that of Comptroller Brad Lander, raising a net of under 92,000 in donations compared to the net of 1,078,000 for this tie. With aggregate donations, the overall was closer to 2 million. In the time since the individual notices highlighted by CFP staff, and in the time since its response to the penalty notice, the tie has been able to identify and resolve some of the issues raised. Given the extraordinary scale of the activity and a relatively unreasonable timeline to respond to CFP staff requests, the tie asks that the board use its discretion to accept the requested documentation at this time. Regarding the June 2022 request related to bank variances, the tie has been able to get a detailed review of its bank records and reconcile the claimed $120,200 in underreported. What CFP staff has claimed is an underreported amount is in fact the redeposit of bank checks that were made out to donors but were issued incorrectly, either due to bank error or staff error. Specifically, January 20th, the tie redeposited $33,800 in bank checks out of a total of $183,800 issued that day. January 25th, the tie redeposited $22,200. May 2nd, the tie redeposited $61,200. In January 1st, the tie redeposited $200. And finally, on June 30th, 2022, the tie redeposited $3,000 in bank checks. Additionally, the tie has identified several expenditure refunds that contributed to the overall variance. These include 2 return debits from paychecks on November 16th, valued $8,250.95, and $4,139.37. 2 refunds from JetBlue valued at $418.40 each. 2 refunds from Delta, $266.60 each, and a refund from the Waldorf Astoria on December 1st, $386.77. The TIE is currently able to provide the merchant account statements to CFP staff as indicated on a November 1st, 2022 call with CFP staff. The TIE was under the impression that its documentation was provided to CFP previously and apologizes for this misunderstanding. During the November 1st call, CFP staff indicated that this issue was partially moot as the recommended penalty was reduced from a failure to respond to a late response. Regarding the July 2022 request for 57 bank checks not previously uploaded, counsel to the TIE has reviewed all refunds and checked CSmart to identify the missing bank checks and has been able to obtain the 57 bank checks identified by CFP staff. Copies are currently held in our possession. This review was done by hand by the two of us. The TIE contests recommendation of separate penalties related to documentation. The guidelines in place during the 2021 cycle are silent regarding the calculation of separate penalties for a TIE's failure to respond to a request for information. Although CFP staff's recommendation to the board argues that separate penalties should be imposed, that's not supported by the language of the 2021 guidelines. Although the 2023 guidelines make specific reference to separate penalties for failure to provide documentation, it would be extremely punitive to apply the newly described policy retroactively to the 2021 TIE. Additionally, since the requested documentation is necessarily related, it would be excessive to doubly penalize the TIE for the documentation. The TIE believes that the board should be using its discretion to more appropriately calculate a single penalty for any violation for failure to provide documentation. The board accepts the TIE's offer to provide the requested documentation at this time, including our detailed review of the variance, merchant account statements, and copies of the refund checks. We suggest that a single penalty be imposed for a late response to documentation request, and the time period be calculated from the time that CFP staff indicated the response was due, ending on that date which CFP staff indicated they would not allow the TIE to provide any additional documentation in the response to the penalty notice. The TIE calculates this to be a period of 96 days, and under the penalty guidelines, $50 a day would comprise $4,800. Alternatively, the TIE believes that the penalty amount should be assessed based on the aggregate value at issue in each request, variance of $120,400, under reporting, 56,207.88 over reporting, 23,960 undocumented refunds for a total of $416,257.88 rather than the overall amount raised. In this case, the penalty based on 1% of the aggregate amount of transactions at issue would constitute $4,162.58. In summation, this TIE operated at a tremendous scale, overcoming extraordinary burdens while still ensuring substantial compliance with the law and rules in a compressed time frame of only a handful of months. We ask that any penalties reflect the relatively minor errors detailed in this area of law that is very detailed and often difficult. In a perfect world, full-time staff would be assigned to uphold the letter and spirit of the law. As we know, the reality of transitions and campaigns is that the bulk of work is done by part-time staff and volunteers. During a bureaucratic transition, attempting to maintain safe protocols due to COVID-19, this can be nearly impossible, and we are asking for the understanding of life realities. Thank you to the staff for its time and to the board for its time.
Ms. Bursky?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm not going to respond substantively to the list of transactions that I secured for the first time that don't have it writing, but I will speak to the timeline and the penalty amount. So first, this was not a situation where there was a back and forth with the TIE and there was an issue about the tight turnaround. We heard nothing. There was no response. So the request on May 16th, followed by the request on June 22nd and July 19th, there were no responses to any of those. The same documentation was then requested again in the penalty notice on August 15th. The original deadline to respond to that was September 19th, and then an extension was granted to October 3rd. No further extensions were requested. So at that point, it was our understanding that the TIE had compiled everything that it needed in response to those requests, and there were no additional requests for more time. Again, the first notification that there were any documents additionally to be submitted was after staff informed the TIE of its updated recommendations after having analyzed the notice response already. As Mr. Fenigiani noted, the merchant account statements would actually not affect the penalty because those were included with, even though they were not provided, the May 16th request has already been fully downgraded from failure to respond to late response, and that included the merchant account statement. So were they to be provided at this time, that would not change the penalty for that particular request. And in terms of the separate penalties being assessed, this is because different documentation and information was requested at each of those times, and that is why those are treated as separate requests. That's how we've done it for every tie in the 2021 election cycle.
I'm troubled by the request to submit information now at the very, very last moment and long after it was due. And I'm speaking only for myself. We haven't deliberated, and I haven't consulted with other members of the board. As far as I'm concerned, if we were to consider accepting that offer, it's less because of a claim that it might reduce the penalty than it is that there are some very significant, fairly large discrepancies here that on the record that we have so far are unexplained and therefore troubling. I mean, they may turn out to be, not troubling at all once the facts are known, but there are real gaps in the record. And for myself, I would say that any inclination to accept late documentation, really at the 11th hour, would be mostly because I'm troubled by the gaps in the record, not so much necessarily because I'm troubled by the amounts of the penalty. But in any event, we will consider in our deliberations, we will of course consider your offer to submit additional information at this late date. And if we were to accept it, it would obviously require an adjournment of or postponement of our decision on these penalties, but we'll discuss that in our deliberations.
Just one big thing, what is it that you will produce today, 57 checks?
We have the 57 checks. We have copies of the merchant account statements for reference to satisfy the gaps in what record there is. And we have an accounting of the variances that was done in part thanks to documentation that has truthfully come out, some of it as recent as just a few weeks ago, as people are turning over documentation that they had themselves, stored away, stashed away, and some things people assured they do not have copies of, and then a copy of it appears after giving over what is described as a nothing document. So we have that accounting of this overview, and of course, any backup documentation that comes with this, we can provide electronically. We didn't print copies of all of it, but we do have physically here with us now 57 checks, merchant account statements, and the detailed listing that my colleague can actually speak to more if you wanted to get into the details on it.
Yeah, I don't think we want to get into the details of something that we've never seen before. As I said, we'll consider in deliberations your offer. If we were to accept it, we'll make arrangements to do it in a organized and appropriate manner. Other questions by members of the board?
Well, we greatly appreciate your consideration. And thank you again for your time.
All right. Anything further? All right. Well, thank you very much. We have one more candidate appearance to deal with today. So I'll ask Mr. Marte and or his representative to come up to the table, and CFP staff as well. Proceed with the next matter. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Christopher Marte. I was a candidate for City Council in 2021. I'm here to represent our Marte 2022 tie account. And this is.
Hi, Kaylee Cowboy for the tie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Joseph Gallagher, Senior Counsel for the CFP.
So you were sitting here, so you heard the little description I gave of how we proceed. So I'm going to ask Mr. Gallagher to So state what the issues are before us, and then you'll have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Before the board this morning is the matter of the Christopher Marte 2021 transition and inauguration entity. Councilmember Marte was elected to the first council district in Manhattan, and the campaign was a participant in the program. CFB staff recommends that the board find that Ty committed one violation of the act and board rules for a late response to requests for information or documentation, and the Ty contests this violation and penalty.
Okay. Mr. Marte?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you to the board for taking the time and actually holding this process and giving people an opportunity, and to Mr. Gallagher and Samantha Parrish, who is my community liaison. They both have done phenomenal work and have been super responsive throughout all the campaigns that we've run through the CFB account. We know that this violation is pretty straightforward. I admit that we did respond late to the deadline. However, I just wanted to say that it was in the first month or two of getting into office, and so we were extremely busy getting things off the ground, opening up the campaign office, hiring staff, and we just lost focus of the time. And so we wanted to be here just to show respect to the process and for the people just to be able to hear our perspective, and we're happy with any decisions that you come through with. I don't know if Caitlin wants to add anything else.
Well, our government office, not campaign.
Yeah, our government office. I can't do.
Okay, well, thank you. We appreciate your statement and your appearance here today. I don't imagine you have anything further to say. So with that, we will take our usual time out to go into deliberations, and we'll be back in a little while. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So the board has deliberated with respect to the two appearances that we had today, and I'll take them in the order in which they appeared. First, the tie of Mayor Eric Adams. The board has decided to accept the offer of the tie to submit additional information, including any sworn statements, checks, accounting information, or any other information that is in any way responsive to the original requests and to the notices of penalty. But I want to make a few points with respect to our decision to do so. We are motivated in large part by a desire that the record, the public record in this matter be more complete, and that we have a better view of the facts underlying what I mentioned before, or some significant discrepancies. We offer no opinion one way or the other as to whether this additional information might affect the penalty being assessed. And we will ask our staff to analyze the material for us, and also to let us know whether their recommendation with respect to a penalty changes. If it does, then there needs to be a new notice. If not, we will, when their analysis is complete, we'll just put it on the calendar for the meeting following that analysis. I also want to reiterate, because we've had this happen before, that we really regret this tie's late submission of information. We have done this on occasion before, accepting information at the 11th hour. We don't like to do it. We have rules about this, and we really wish to see both campaigns and ties abide by the time limitations that are in those rules. But this is a case of significance and of public interest that induces us to accept this late offer of information so that the record will be complete. And so we will not take a vote on the penalties with respect to that matter today. With respect to the campaign of Christopher Marty, the board has deliberated, and I will set forth the motion that I propose for us to adopt, which is that the board finds the following violation, proposes the following penalty: late response to requests for information or documentation, $200. I move the acceptance of that proposal. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Turning to other business. Just give me a second to get back to the minutes, to the agenda. The next item on our agenda is a vote or a consideration of my prior denial of a Rule 709 petition by candidate Charles Barron.
I move.
Beth, you want to just sort of tee up what that's about?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry. Actually, I don't have that with me. Sorry. I thought you were going to bridge to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've reviewed the petition, and we've reviewed the denial, and I move that we ratify the chair's denial of the petition.
Is there a second? Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And next, we have our vote on public funds payments.
That's me.
That's
Okay.
Okay.
That's not Rich. Okay, so we have a number of campaigns who are recommended for payment today, starting with City Council campaign of Susan Lee for District 1, recommended for $3,800. Then we have the Council campaign of Inez E. Dickens, District 9, recommended for $82,901. Council campaign of Al Taylor, District 9, recommended for $69,958. Council campaign of George F. Haverneck, District 13, recommended for $40,546. Council campaign of Christy Marmorato, District 13, $80,712. Council campaign of Tony Avella, District 19, recommended for $1,482. Council campaign of Paul D. Graziano, District 19, recommended for $6,308. Council campaign of Vicky Palladino, District 19, recommended for $13,870. Council campaign of Shekhar Krishnan, District 25, recommended for $174,367. And council campaign of Hallie Kim, District 26, recommended for $102,334. Council campaign of Ethan Felder, District 29, recommended for $1,254. And that's not it. Okay. Council campaign of Chris Banks, District 42, $70,490. Council campaign of Charles Barron, District 42, $61,940. Council campaign of Susan Zhuang, District 43, recommended for $167,884. And there's just one more. Camilla Hanks, Council District 49, recommended for $173,850. So that takes us to a total 15 of $1,051,696.
Thank you. I move the approval of those payments. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. I think that completes our business for today. We are going to go into executive session to discuss some matters, but not to take any action. And so I will move that we go into executive session and adjourn directly from there. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. We are done for today. Thank you very much.